Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining this conversation today, facilitated by the International Parliamentary Network for Education. The network was born last year, and its mission is to build political leadership for education. It consists of members of parliament from right around the world who are committed to education and who have agreed to do more to accelerate the achievement of Sustainable Development Goal 4, quality education for all. And as part of that effort, we're working with parliamentarians, including critically on the issue of education financing, to ensure that there's more financing available and that it's better, both in low-income countries and in donor states. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by two parliamentarians from Zimbabwe on the one hand and Germany on the other, for a conversation about exactly that, about how they are working as parliamentarians to grow the volume and the quality of financing available in both of their jurisdictions and internationally. So I want to welcome the Honourable Priscilla Misihairabwi-Mushonga. She's the chairperson of the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Primary and Secondary Education in the Parliament of Zimbabwe, and also Ottmar von Holtz, a member of the German Bundestag, where he's the chairperson of the Economic Cooperation and Development Committee. So thank you both for joining us, making yourselves available. Priscilla, I just wondered if you might introduce yourself, telling us a little bit about you and what your responsibilities in Parliament are.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having invited me to this, which I think a very important conversation. I'm Priscilla Misihairabwi-Mushonga. I was elected as a member of Parliament in the year 2000, so I've been in Parliament for too long a time. I come from the feminist movement. I worked with women's organizations before I came into politics. And I think what got me interested around issues of education is really my feminist background. So as I come in, I come with a bias around young girls, women, and how education does impact on their lives in general. I am a member of the opposition. I am a member of the MDC T, and my constituency is in Bulawayo, one of the second largest cities. So I represent the Bulawayo province. I come in as, we do have a quota system in Zimbabwe. So these are seats that are specifically reserved for women, but they are contested seats. So you run on a pro rata basis. Your political party gets those seats on a pro rata basis. Currently, I'm chairperson of the primary and secondary education. We do have a portfolio committee system in Parliament, and we are the ones that provide oversight on the Ministry of Education itself, but generally on issues that are to do with education insofar as government is concerned.
Amazing, fantastic, thanks. So lots there to come back to, but that's a really fantastic, fantastic introduction. So Ottmar, can I ask you to do the same and share some of your background with our viewers? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, yes, of course. And I also want to thank you for the invitation to take part in this discussion. I was elected to Parliament in 2017. That was the last elections in Germany. And there in the Parliament, I represent the constituency of Hildesheim. That's a small village just south of Hanover. I'm a member of the Green Party in Germany, and I'm the spokesperson for civil conflict prevention for the Greens parliamentary group. In fact, I'm not the chair, as you said, of the Committee on Economic Cooperation and Development, but I'm a member there doing global health and global education issues. But of course, I'm the chair of the subcommittee on civil crisis prevention and conflict management. And in this context, of course, we also have a lot of topics that have to do with education in crisis context. So I'm a great supporter of GPE.
Amazing. Okay, great. So lots of relevant experience there to draw upon. And Ottmar, if I may, I wanted to start with a really interesting, what I think is an interesting connection. I understand that you're no stranger to Southern Africa, and in fact that you grew up in Namibia, which has been influential in shaping your commitment to education. Can you say something about that?
Yes, I was born in Namibia in a small town called Robabis. That's close to the Kalahari Desert, close to the border to Botswana. But since when I was a child, we moved to Windhoek, the capital, where I went to a German school. At that time, we still had South African apartheid being enforced in Namibia, which meant that only white children had access to good schooling. But then we had in the 70s years where apartheid was gradually abolished in Namibia. And this had a great effect on me and for my biography. For the first time, we had Black people, Black young children, a Black boy. I can remember that day in our class, and I really vividly remember the spirit of optimism. Education was now for everyone and not exclusively for some people. And it's really that from then on, I was always committed to making schooling and vocational training accessible for all.
Amazing. Okay, great. I think that was a really interesting experience that's driven your political beliefs and commitment. And I think it's really interesting to share some of the things that have shaped our values and beliefs. So Priscilla, I wonder if you can give us a little taste. You gave us an indication that you came to politics from your feminist perspective. But what's driven your engagement in politics and influenced your commitment to education? Oh, you're on mute as well.
I'm born and bred in Zimbabwe, completely, totally educated here. And therefore, I grew up living the realities of Black people, particularly looking at the issues that affected women and young women in particular, and young girls in particular. And I think what my colleague has just raised, living the realities that issues of education were preserved for either the white people or a preserve for those that had resources. So clearly there were class issues that were associated with your access to education. I was lucky because my parents were middle class. My father was a teacher. So I was able to access what a lot of other Black people did not particularly access. And I was also fortunate in that I was born in an urban setting, which was quite different from the setting that the majority of young girls in Zimbabwe are subjected to. Most of 80% of our young girls are actually in the rural areas, and the situations there are different. So my working in civic society and my feminist orientation gave me the passion that when I walked into Parliament, one of my first areas to look at were issues around education, because I knew exactly how it affected Black people, and in particular, Black young girls.
Fantastic. So both of you with really fascinating histories that have brought you into politics, into Parliament, and committed to education. So Priscilla, if we think about the state of education in Zimbabwe now, can you just give us a bit of a sense of what that looks like, who gets access to education and the quality of it? Just to give our viewers a sense of what the situation in Zimbabwe is for the education sector.
Well, in Zimbabwe, at the beginning, when we got our independence in 1980, between 1980 and 1990, we really had, quite a good stride because that was the beginning of independence. That was the opening of spaces, and Black people could get into education. But obviously, when we started going into the structural adjustment programs that were brought in by IMF, we had to cut down on the social sector. So you'll find that when you look at the investment in education, we started seeing a drop around the 1990s, where we kind of took on the IMF, World Bank processes, which defined how much money you could put to the social sector. So gradually we saw a reduction in spending within education, and I think it continued, and it has been largely affected now with COVID-19, where one can see a situation in which I can confidently say to you, they are not accessing education. And there have been a lot of repercussions, which we'll probably talk about, dropouts that have then since happened, pregnancies for young girls. So we've got a lot of dropouts, girls that got pregnant during the lockdown, a lot of sexual abuse that happened during that particular point in time, because schools were a safe haven. But generally, because we are also under sanctions, we have not had as much aid as other countries would have in sub-Saharan Africa in terms of the social sector. Limited money in terms of the revenue that government can build in, because when industry is not working, the money, the cake that is there at the table that can be given to education is limited. So, for example, we have now 13% of the revenue is what goes to education, but even within that 13%, 98% of that money goes to salaries. So you're really left with 2%. That goes to education. So those that are able to take their children to school, the burden of educating the children is largely on the parents. So if the parents themselves do not have the resources, it would mean that a lot of children are actually out of school, or if they're in school, it's not really effective learning for purposes of ensuring that you are educating kids. You are basically letting kids to come to school, but there is very little education that is taking place. And the teachers have been on strike because they also are complaining that they are incapacitated, they don't have enough resources. So one would say the education sector in Zimbabwe is probably one where you can see the legacy problems that are associated with either our economic issues, but also in particular now with the issue of COVID-19.
So you've painted a pretty dire picture there of a combination of structural adjustment, which influenced reductions in spending, the challenge of sanctions and civil strife historically in Zimbabwe, and then now the challenges of the government in actually growing its budget and then what it spends its money on. So can I ask, if we think about your position then as a parliamentarian, as someone who's overseeing government action, as a chair of a parliamentary committee, what are the prospects for turning this situation around and securing the funding necessary to get kids back to school and, as you say, support them to learn when they're there?
The first thing is that we have to speak truth to power. We have to engage our governments and indicate that the issue around education is problematic. So in our oversight role, we have raised the issue of the need to increase the budget allocation that goes to education, but not only increase it, ensure that, in fact, when we give money, when we allocate a budget, we ensure that there is a per capita grant that is given to a child. Because like you said, if we are working with 2%, that is what is actually going into the education of the child. That in itself is almost nothing. So we are raising those issues to ensure that government takes on the issues that are to do with the salaries and do not include the issues of salaries in the budget, so that we can effectively say how much money is being raised in the budget. And we are clearly supporting the position that has been taken by President Uhuru and Prime Minister Boris around ensuring that there's a 20% allocation that is given to education. But for us, even that 20% would not be enough if that 20% is inclusive of the issues that are to do with salaries. And of course, we are also looking at the issue of domestic financing, because we have also seen, as we have visited some of the countries in the region, like countries like Zambia, Malawi, where we have noted that where partners or donors have come in and they have financed resources with the problems that are associated with aid from those countries, even where they've given in pledges within the SDGs, those monies they've been pulled out from the funders. So you find that without domestic financing, you actually have a bigger problem. So one of the things that we're talking about within the situation, and we're looking at how the private sector can come in particular, how the extractive industry can come in, because whilst all these things are problematic in Zimbabwe, we're finding that there are certain sectors that are still making a lot of money. So mining, for example, within the context of Zimbabwe, is where money is made. But we are also talking to finance ministers and saying, how do we ensure that taxation and tariffs around taxation for extractive industry are worked around? Because we can't tax the person in the street, like I'm saying, with an 80% unemployment in Zimbabwe. Pay as you earn is not an area you could look at, and further taxation for the generality of the population in Zimbabwe would be problematic, because people do not have the disposable income that they're supposed to have. So we are looking at beginning to engage with the IMF, for example, and say when they give their guidance notes around how economies should be managed, surely they should not continue to press our governments to cut down on the social sector. This morning, I had just a meeting with the Minister of Finance, and one of the things I was talking to him is that we are due for getting what we call SDRs, special drawing rights from the IMF. And one of the things that we are talking about is that we are not looking at that money being used to pay debts. We are looking at that money being invested in the social sector, in education. And I'm glad that he committed to me that none of the monies that we are going to get through SDRs is going to go to issues of debt. So we are looking at it from a two-pronged situation. Domestic issues in which our governments need to change the way they deal with revenues and allocations. But we're also looking at beginning to hype the international conversations. Because if we continue the debt crisis that we are in, and we are not getting debt relief, and most of our money that we get as revenue is money that we are then forced to pay to the international community, it does not make it easy for us to be able to provide for education. So I guess those are the conversations that we're having. We are also pushing for having regional conversations, so that as SADC, for example, we can have one position, one is a message to our own governments, but secondly, as a message to the international community, because we are finding that, except for a few countries within the region, most of our countries are really struggling around issues of education. And of course, lastly, my most favorite one is to begin to look at what does this mean in terms of women's empowerment, in terms of girls' empowerment. So for the first time in Zimbabwe, we actually got government to allocate a certain amount of money towards support for pregnant girls. Whether that support is social or whether it's economic in its very nature. It's not a lot of money, but for us, it was the principle in which an allocation also speaks to the political will and an acknowledgement that, yeah, there may be a problem with education, but there's also a slant that we need to look at, which is a slant towards ensuring that there's a gender look to the kind of problems that are associated with education. So I would say those are the things that we're looking at, but financing is at the heart. I mean, e-learning that people are talking about is only there for the private schools, for the elite schools, and for the urban schools. But you can't talk of e-learning when you're talking about completely rural areas where access to the internet is not there. Access to the gadgets that are supposed to support e-learning is not there. So we are really looking at one of the main things that we are talking about as parliamentarians is to begin to say, let's have a financing mechanism that addresses these kinds of gaps that we are noticing within Zimbabwe, but I must say within Africa in general.
Amazing. You've given us a very persuasive and expert kind of tour of some of the challenges there in respect of education financing. I could listen to you talk very persuasively in a very analytical way for hours. That was so impressive. And you touched on a number of things. I did want to draw people's attention to President Kenyatta's statement that you referred to, the call to action on education financing, which, as you rightly say, amongst other things, it invites heads of government to commit to at least 20% of public spending on education. But as you rightly pointed out, 20% of a small pie is still a small amount. So unless the government can raise more taxes and can address the issue of revenue generation, the size, however the proportion, will be constrained unless those issues can be raised. And as a country that has a large extractive industry, we know that is, amongst others, where some of that financing can come from and needs to be addressed. And then, you raised other issues, including ensuring that that money, when it comes in, is paid and used sensitively, including to advance equity for gender. So lots of issues there. And you've got a very kind of comprehensive agenda that you've set out as the chair of that committee. And I also should raise again, and just to reinforce your point about special drawing rights, it's a critical issue to increase the liquidity of countries and then to ensure that any of the relief that brings does not go to debt servicing, but instead, as you say, is used to finance public services. So we'll think about all of that, and I know these are issues that Ottmar will have been working on in Germany as well, including Germany's position on some of these issues in international fora. So let's jump hemispheres in context and take the conversation to Berlin and to the German Bundestag. Firstly, Ottmar, I know we're really looking now to the issue of education aid, support from donors to advance the achievement of SDG 4. And I know that you and your party have consistently said that Germany needs to increase its aid to education and specifically its support for GPE, the Global Partnership for Education. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, of course, you're right. Our party, the Greens, have criticized the fact in the past years that the German GPE funds have stagnated persistently at about 7 million euros per year for a long time. But I think our struggle has paid off, as the first increases were approved by the Budget Committee in the Parliament in 2018. Germany's financial contribution gradually increased to 75 million euros by 2021. That's for the budget for this year. And from our point of view, however, the annual German contribution to GPE should actually be at least 110 million euros per year. That is what we requested year by year in the Budget Committee and the Development Committee when we were debating on the budget in the Parliament. And we will definitely be maintaining this request for the coming years.
Great, and congratulations on those efforts. I've witnessed kind of Germany's gradual increasing of education aid and support for GPE. So all credit to you and your colleagues in the Parliament for achieving that. You've spoken about the work that your parliamentary colleagues on the Budget Committee have done. And I think cross-committee cooperation is a very interesting issue in itself. And it's actually one that Priscilla referred to when she was talking about speaking to ministers of finance and other committees in the Parliament. Can you just tell us a little bit about how your committee, Development Cooperation, was working with the Budget Committee and made common cause on this issue?
Yes, of course, we in the Committee on Economic Cooperation and Development, we also discussed the budget for the relevant ministry. That's in Germany, the BMZ, that's the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. The decisive meeting, of course, is in the committee on in the Budget Committee. But within the parliamentary groups, we stay in contact to each other. So for me, as a member of the Committee for Economic Cooperation and Development, one thing is clear: education is by far the most important resource in a society, and it is a prerequisite for every individual to lead a self-determined life. So together with my counterpart in the Budget Committee, we really stand shoulder to shoulder in increasing the money dedicated to education. I know that my colleagues in the Budget Committee are on my side for this message. So the green budgetary amendments are formed in close cooperation between the specialized politicians and on the one hand, the ones responsible for the budget. Even those of the budget committee are speaking in Parliament when we have the budget debate. And I know that my colleague there is saying things which I fully support. So this allows us to advocate for our ideas in more than just one committee. And I think our consistent pressure on raising education budget issues had an impact on government parties too.
Mm. So Ottmar, just on that, you talked there about how your party, the Green Party, were working across the Parliament, using your roles in various parliamentary committees to pursue this issue in a unified way. Of course, you're in opposition at the moment in Germany, but you have been influential in achieving this significant breakthrough for education financing. So what has that looked like in terms of trying to influence the government, which is, of course, a coalition, and how receptive have they been, and what do you think has worked most effectively in making the case so successfully?
Well, we make use of the parliamentary instruments that we have. We draft motions, we table amendments, and we table also policy papers. These are our means as an opposition party to advocate our political ideas and to promote concepts and strategies. We try to influence opinion, and sometimes even we manage, often with the support of civil society organizations, to influence the policy of the governing parties. So they don't then want to stand behind us if they see that non-governmental organizations or maybe even multilateral organizations pick up the ideas that we also promote. Then the governing parties don't want to fall behind that. No, green ideas and mindset, this is always my story for the past decades, actually, that our ideas and mindset have become more popular in Germany, also in other countries, not only in educational or global educational issues, but other issues too. So the members of other parties have noticed this, and they are trying to include some of our oldest requests into their policy making, which is quite satisfying.
Great, and I want to come back to that in a second, but Priscilla, if I could come back to you, just to maybe respond to some of the story that Ottmar set out in respect of using Parliament, working across committees, working across parties. Can you give us a flavour of what that looks like in Zimbabwe? Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, thank you. We have done very, very well in Zimbabwe, and I'm happy to report that the issue of education has taken center stage, taking place. Like I said, I'm an opposition member, but I chair a portfolio committee that is made up of all the political parties that are in Parliament. And I must say that we have never had a situation in which there's disagreement on the direction. One of the things that was fascinating was when we came in with the Education Amendment Act, which allowed for pregnant girls to stay in schools, but also provided for issues like sanitary wear. Yes, they may be limited, but there's now a budget allocation towards it. And it was largely pushed by members of Parliament across the political divide and across the gender divide, I must say, which was really interesting, because some of these things you'd think they would take a gender outlook. So working across political parties has not been a problem for us. I just told you right now, I'm coming from meeting the Minister of Finance, who obviously is coming from the ruling party, but we had a conversation around SDRs and where the priorities are, and him asking where he thinks we should be putting the priorities, even as we allocate the resources to education. So I must say that in that area, we have had positive scores in terms of, and we work very closely with civic society. So the Education Coalition of Zimbabwe, which is made up of civic society organizations across Zimbabwe, is part of it. They've supported our programs. When we go out to look at what is happening in communities, we are not only going as ourselves, as parliamentarians, but taking with us civic society. And that strategic alliance has really gotten us to begin to raise the issue around education and to get some policy changes. Trade unions, teachers' trade unions have been really good in working with us, and we've been supporting them even as they begin to push issues to do with policy changes and conditions of service.
Mm. Amazing. So, at IPNEd, we talk about working with parliamentarians to grow political leadership for education and supporting parliamentarians to perform their function more effectively, their function as representatives, as advocates, as legislators, as shapers of budgets, approvers of budgets, and ultimately as monitors of government activity. And we also make the point that doing this in concert with civil society is critical, and across party, regionally and globally. And it's been so interesting to hear both of you today echo all of those sentiments and speak so persuasively about what can be done when that work is done effectively by parliamentarians. It's been really gratifying and incredibly inspiring. Before we close, I want to give both of you an opportunity to say some final remarks, but I have a further question. I'm going to go back to you for a moment, if I may, Ottmar, and just ask. So you've been in this conversation with your colleague from Zimbabwe. I don't know what Germany's kind of knowledge of and historic engagement in Southern Africa or Zimbabwe in particular is. But I was wondering from that point of view, what your sense of the issues in that part of the world are, and whether or not from your perspective, some of the challenges that Zimbabwe faces are on the agenda in Germany and are being discussed, and essentially what can be done to support colleagues like Priscilla move the needle in the right direction on education and of course on other issues.
Well, maybe if you allow me first to slide into a Namibian perspective, and I really want to tell Priscilla that by in all the problems that she has told us today, in Namibia, people always say the Zimbabweans, they got real good education. So the perspective of the Namibians is they actually envy the means and the possibilities that in the past Zimbabweans had to get a school education. But nevertheless, there are these huge challenges, and we struggle actually in Germany to really wind up economic cooperation and or let's say development cooperation programs with Zimbabwe. In the past, there were some problems. We have even stopped development cooperation, but we actually, again, from the opposition side, regularly I have asked the government, what are you doing for Zimbabwe? And I think we could do more. I think we have to get this really better onto the agenda for this country specifically. I've never been to Zimbabwe, but I know a lot of people that also stay in Windhoek, that live there. They are originally from Zimbabwe, and when I speak to them, I always think this country should really be on the agenda because I think Zimbabwe's got huge potential to be really like a stable anchor also in Southern Africa.
Amazing, thanks. And Priscilla, hearing that and also recognizing that there's a global audience listening to this conversation, including of other parliamentarians, what's your message, particularly, I think, to the international community about how to support and accelerate your efforts in Zimbabwe to close the education gap and to increase financing for quality education there?
Thank you, and thank you very much, Ottmar. It was really good to hear you speak about Zimbabwe in the manner that you did speak. I think we should do more of these conversations between ourselves as legislators. But I think my message to the international community is to say we need to invest in education. I know that usually some of these support issues are associated with issues of politics, which is important, democracy, which is important. But it's also important to understand that when you are going to build a new future, a new citizenry, an empowered citizenry, education is the area you need to invest in. And among all the conversations that we need to do, it is about asking ourselves, what kind of a future do we want to hear? And you're right, Ottmar, in saying Zimbabwe has great people, educated people. But if we don't invest, we are going to lose all that legacy that has been built over years. So the question is, do you want to give up on that future, on that generation that is coming in? We are doing our part internally with our own government. But like I said, some of the things are really associated with the geopolitics, with the global politics, with global resources. And we need to engage with those things very frankly and very openly if we are going to address this issue.
Amazing. So one of the things that IPNEd does is it tries to support individual MPs to bring members of parliament together at the national level, regionally and globally, and to amplify that work. And hopefully this conversation has done a bit of that. But I also think for me, it's been very instructive in bringing two leading legislators together from different parts of the globe to have a fantastic conversation, which I feel confident is going to kick off some other initiatives, more work streams, and at the very least, a firm friendship and a common cause between, I know both of you, and if you'll have me as well, supporting both of your efforts in Zimbabwe and in Germany. I've certainly been inspired by the work that both of you have talked about today, and also the course, the agenda that you've set out for continuing on the route to growing and improving education financing, both domestically and internationally. So I hope as other colleagues listen to this conversation, they're inspired too. I think it's been a great contribution to the Global Education Summit in London, and we look forward to a successful summit and to continuing this work and amplifying and supporting the work of parliamentarians, including both of you. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this conversation and for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you too from my side. It has been a real pleasure, and thanks, and good luck with the work of the GPE.
Thank you so much, both of you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.